Germany in the first half of the 20th century, cradle of some of humanity's greatest thinkers, transformed into the stage for one of the greatest tragedies ever witnessed. How could a nation that produced Kant, Beethoven, and Goethe plunge into the darkness of Nazism? What allowed ordinary, educated, and apparently rational people to become accomplices to unimaginable atrocities? Dietrich Bonhoeffer, a theologian born in February 1906, faced these questions not just as an intellectual, but as someone who lived through the direct consequences of a country in moral collapse. Bonhoeffer was not merely a passive observer. As a German Lutheran pastor and neo-Orthodox theologian, he risked his life as a dissident and resistance fighter against the Nazi regime. His struggle was not only political or ideological, it was fundamentally moral. For years, Bonhoeffer desperately tried to open the eyes of his compatriots. He spoke out against growing hatred, blind obedience, and indifference to cruelty. He genuinely believed that if he could present the truth clearly enough, people would awaken from their collective trance. But something disconcerting happened. No matter how eloquent his arguments, no matter how clear the evidence presented, people refused to see. It was in this devastating context that Bonhoeffer came to a surprising conclusion. The true enemy was not evil itself. It was stupidity. This statement may seem counterintuitive at first glance. After all, how could stupidity be more dangerous than intentional malice? To understand this perspective, we must first understand how Bonhoeffer conceived of evil. According to him, evil, however terrible, possesses a quality that makes it vulnerable: self-awareness. People who commit atrocities at some level know they are violating moral principles. This awareness creates discomfort, an internal tension that can be exploited. Evil carries within itself the seed of its own destruction. Stupidity, on the other hand, operates in a completely different manner. It feels neither guilt nor shame. It doesn't recognize facts, it simply ignores them. It doesn't debate, it merely ridicules. And most dangerously, it is absolutely convinced of its own righteousness. As Martin Luther King Jr. later observed, in tune with Bonhoeffer's thinking, nothing in the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity. Stupidity often operates unconsciously. People don't realize their own foolishness. They cling to their beliefs with such certainty that no argument, evidence, or rational explanation can shake them. We have all encountered people who use evasive phrases like "whatever" or "I don't care" when we try to engage them in serious discussion. These expressions function as shields against recognizing their own intellectual limitations. The frustration of dealing with such individuals is comparable to confronting a narcissist. There exists a fundamental impermeability to self-criticism that makes genuine dialogue practically impossible. However, the danger of stupidity goes far beyond the individual level. It spreads through society like a contagious disease, infiltrating groups, movements, and systems that demand unquestioning obedience. As Bonhoeffer realized, a tyrant's power essentially depends on the stupidity of many. It is no coincidence that mass stupidity frequently accompanies rising authoritarianism. People don't lose their intelligence, they voluntarily abandon it. They sacrifice their mental independence in exchange for a sense of belonging. They stop thinking critically and begin to mechanically repeat what they are told. Once a person renounces their capacity to think, there is no limit to what they can be led to do. They will commit atrocities without recognizing them as such. They will spread lies, calling them truths. They will destroy lives, believing they are on the right side of history. Stupidity is not merely irritating, it is dangerous. It becomes a weapon in the hands of those who know how to manipulate it. And perhaps the most disturbing realization is that it cannot be combated with reason alone. It is crucial to understand that Bonhoeffer did not consider stupidity an intellectual defect, but a moral one. An individual can be cognitively brilliant and yet profoundly stupid in their actions and moral choices. The example of Martin Heidegger perfectly illustrates this distinction. Recognized as one of the greatest philosophers of the 20th century, Heidegger, despite his extraordinary intellectual capacity, pledged loyalty to the Nazi Party and remained unrepentant until his death in 1976. In Bonhoeffer's conception, he was simultaneously intelligent and profoundly stupid. In contrast, a person can have modest intellectual abilities and still demonstrate profound wisdom, moral integrity, and compassion. Intelligence and wisdom are distinct qualities. Stupidity, as Bonhoeffer conceived it, is not the absence of intelligence, it is the absence of moral courage. And no one is born stupid. We become stupid when we abdicate the responsibility to think for ourselves. Stupidity is, therefore, a mental state that arises when a person renounces their responsibility to think autonomously. It is not an innate characteristic, but a transformation, a condition which people allow themselves to succumb to. This transformation is not merely individual, it is profoundly social. Stupidity thrives in environments where independent thinking is discouraged, where people simply follow orders, conform, and submit to prevailing narratives without question. Bonhoeffer observed how the Nazi regime transformed ordinary people into followers incapable of thinking critically. These people were not inherently evil, nor necessarily intellectually limited, but they had stopped questioning. They abandoned their ability to discern truth from falsehood, becoming instruments of a greater agenda. George Orwell depicted a similar transformation in 1984, where Big Brother brainwashed citizens to the point of limiting their own thoughts. The regime not only controlled their actions, it made them stupid so they could no longer think properly. Bonhoeffer made the same observation. When power rises, stupidity spreads. Under the influence of authority, whether political or ideological, many people willingly relinquish their inner independence. They accept slogans, propaganda, and simplistic explanations, ceasing to see the world as it truly is. This dynamic explains how entire societies can be led to accept the unacceptable, tolerate the intolerable, and celebrate the abominable. How can one avoid falling into this trap? Bonhoeffer warned that people become stupid when they give up their ability to question, analyze, and think independently. The first step, therefore, is to refuse to stop thinking. Always ask questions. Challenge authority when necessary. Do not accept something as true merely because it is widely believed. If an idea cannot withstand scrutiny, it does not deserve to be accepted. Stupidity is a social phenomenon. It thrives in environments where people conform without thinking. Whenever you find yourself agreeing with a group simply because it's easier, stop and ask yourself, am I thinking for myself or just following the crowd? History has repeatedly demonstrated that when large groups of people stop questioning, disaster inevitably follows. Do not allow the comfort of belonging to override the necessity of truth. Friedrich Nietzsche called this herd mentality what it truly is, a surrender of self. Stupidity often results from external influences, propaganda, misinformation, and emotional manipulation. Leaders who depend on stupidity use tactics designed to bypass critical thinking. They appeal to emotions rather than reason, promote simplistic explanations for complex problems, discourage independent thought, and label dissent as dangerous. If an idea is presented in a way that discourages questioning, it was likely designed to manipulate, not inform. Bonhoeffer believed that stupidity cannot be overcome through instruction alone. It requires liberation. People trapped in a system of manipulation and conformity must first be freed externally before they can free their minds. True wisdom comes from liberation from fear, blind loyalty, and unquestioning obedience. The only way to avoid stupidity is to commit to permanent intellectual and moral independence. This was Bonhoeffer's theory of stupidity, a warning for all of us. The contemporary world is filled with misinformation, herd mentalities, and blind loyalty to political figures, ideologies, and narratives that discourage critical thinking. We live in the information age, paradoxically threatened by increasingly sophisticated forms of truth manipulation. Filter bubbles in social media, algorithms that reinforce our prior beliefs, and the growing polarization of public discourse create ideal conditions for the propagation of stupidity as Bonhoeffer conceived it. If we do not actively fight for the preservation of independent thinking, we will not just be battling stupidity, we will be governed by it. The choice is ours: to remain alert, critical, and free, or to succumb to the comfortable seduction of non-thinking. Bonhoeffer's legacy reminds us that this is not merely an intellectual issue, but fundamentally a moral one. The courage to think for oneself, especially when it means swimming against the current, is one of the deepest forms of human integrity. Stupidity as a destructive force proliferates precisely because it offers a path of least resistance. It is easier to accept simplified narratives, catchy slogans, and explanations that confirm our pre-existing views than to face the complexity, ambiguity, and uncertainty that characterize so many important issues. Genuine thinking requires effort, tolerance for frustration, and willingness to change one's mind, qualities that many prefer to avoid. The most disturbing aspect of Bonhoeffer's analysis is its implication that stupidity is neither random nor accidental, but often deliberately cultivated. Authoritarian systems depend on it. Propaganda feeds it. Power structures reward it. Therefore, resisting stupidity is as much a political act as it is intellectual or moral. Maintaining the ability to think critically in a society that discourages independent thought becomes a form of resistance. Bonhoeffer paid the ultimate price for his refusal to surrender to collective stupidity. His determination to maintain his intellectual and moral integrity, even when it meant opposing the dominant current, cost him his life. But his example and writings remain as a beacon for those who value truth above convenience, thinking above conformity, and moral courage above personal safety. Perhaps the most valuable lesson we can extract from Bonhoeffer's theory of stupidity is the need to cultivate communities that value and nurture critical thinking. We need spaces where questioning is encouraged, where diversity of perspectives is celebrated, and where truth is collectively sought with humility and rigor. Only then can we resist the seduction of stupidity and preserve the foundations of human dignity in challenging times. The choice before each of us is clear: to remain awake or to succumb to the sleep of reason. As Bonhoeffer reminded us, stupidity is not an inevitable condition, but a moral choice, and each choice we make brings us closer to or further from it. In a world where the forces of manipulation and conformity are increasingly powerful, the simple act of thinking for oneself becomes a radical form of freedom.